I'm Mayor Lyrian Gaylor-Baird, and thank you for joining us today. A year ago, I announced several initiatives intended to help lead Lincoln toward a more successful, secure, and shared future. The events of the past year have demonstrated the extent to which our future success and security depend upon our willingness to embrace our shared humanity and interconnectedness, to turn not away, but toward one another. Part of turning toward one another as a community means ensuring that our systems and policies promote broad and equitable access to career opportunities, housing, food, healthcare, justice, and more. It also means turning toward one another at a very personal and human level, listening to those with whom we disagree, widening our circles beyond family and friends, learning from those who are unlike us in important ways, and seeing the humanity and goodness in all whom we encounter. That is the work that no one segment of our city can do alone. It requires the participation of all sectors of our community and of each resident. It is a journey, sometimes a long one. And so this event is an invitation to embark on the journey of creating a city of belonging. On the path toward the vision of a city where everyone belongs, my administration was an eager and willing partner on the Together One Lincoln project, launched by Councilmember Sandra Washington in July. Together One Lincoln is a partnership of community members and organizations committed to strengthening Lincoln by creating dialogue and driving action that combats racial inequity by talking and listening deeply with one another. Today's event is one more step on the path to equity, inclusion, and a deeper sense of belonging in Lincoln. The program for today reflects a cross-sectoral collaboration of local organizations, from the private and philanthropic sectors to our cultural centers and health and social services partners. Many extended their support to sponsor and promote this event, and I will recognize them individually at the close of the program. We are thankful for their ongoing involvement in inviting all Lincolnites to join in the journey to make ours a city of belonging, to bridge across difference and division, so we can move closer to becoming the best city and best people we can be. We are so pleased to be joined today by our featured speaker, Professor John Powell, who is the founding director of the Othering and Belonging Institute. We are also pleased to be joined by UNL Law Professor Anna Shavers and Dr. Jeanette Eileen Jones of the UNL History Department, as well as several other Lincoln residents. The topic of today's program is Invitation to a Journey of Belonging, Creating Cultures of Equity and Inclusion. One of the 2 days this program is being officially aired is September 28th, 2020, the high holy day of Yom Kippur among our community members of Jewish faith. The time our Jewish neighbors have spent during Yom Kippur reflecting on atonement and forgiveness can be an inspiration to us all today. Navigating complex issues of pain, identity, and belonging is difficult work, and our path forward will not be perfect. With this in mind, we should approach our journey with an openness, both to the idea that we may make mistakes along the way that will require asking for forgiveness, and that we should be forgiving to those who, in the pursuit of understanding, make mistakes. As we embark on this journey toward belonging, let us commit not to never faltering, but to standing up again and doing better when we do. In this way, we as Lincolnites will learn, move forward, and offer one another grace, compassion, and a sense that we are in this together as a team. Before we hear from our keynote speaker, I'd like to introduce representatives of a team that has recently expressed how important it is to create structures and cultures in which everyone feels seen, heard, and respected, in which everyone belongs. University of Nebraska men's basketball coach Fred Hoiberg and player Kobe Webster now will offer some brief reflections on belonging.
Good afternoon. My name is Fred Hoiberg, and I'm the head men's basketball coach here at the University of Nebraska. First of all, I would like to thank the mayor for giving us this great opportunity to speak about this incredibly important topic. With me today is senior guard Kobe Webster.
Kobe Webster, senior guard from Indianapolis, Indiana, and like Coach said, thank you for this opportunity. In terms of belonging, I think a sense of community that I've come to know here at Nebraska and just in my past 3 years of college have been a huge impact on my life. Being able to be a part of a team, there's that sense of pride, that togetherness that you always feel when you walk in the locker room, you walk on the court. That, like I said, that's just had a big impact on my life and how I want to I guess, portray my life outside of basketball.
Kobe, I guess one question for you. You've been now obviously at two different schools, starting your career at Western Illinois, and now your senior year here at the University of Nebraska. What are some experiences that you've had with teammates as far as creating the type of culture that you have to have success?
I think coming from Western Illinois and being here now, I think being here I've had the chance to meet guys, a lot of guys from outside of the United States. And that's been, I think, had a big impact on me because a lot of the things that go on in the United States don't necessarily happen everywhere in the world. And so understanding their perspectives and seeing their willingness to want to be educated and learn about the topics that we discuss, I think that shows that sports can have a great impact on outsiders and give an example for outsiders to show that even people with diverse backgrounds can come together and achieve something.
And just to piggyback a little bit on what Kobe has said, I think we can use team sport as an opportunity, especially when you have a diverse group of young men like we have here at the University of Nebraska and in basketball in general, where over 80% of our players, student athletes, are black. And one thing that is very important for me in my job, if we want to have any chance for success, is we have to have togetherness. We have to have belonging. We have to have inclusiveness. And for me, one of the most important jobs is to create that type of culture to where everybody is working together. When you see what's going on right now in our country, we need to find a way to unite. There's so much division right now in our country. And hopefully in sport, we can be an example of what it looks like to come together as a group. In order to have any chance of success, we have to have that togetherness. And hopefully we can start to heal in our country right now with everything going on. But for us, I just want to say for Kobe and for his teammates, I am so proud of the fact that they are using their voice, that they are using their platform to try to create change, to try to create positive change, and to try to create belonging and togetherness, just because it is so important to where we go as a country and for our future generations. So again, thank you, Kobe. Thank you, Mayor. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak on this important topic, and we hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you so much, Coach Hoiberg and Kobe. It's great to see the men's basketball team set an example in togetherness and by using their platform to create change towards a more just and inclusive community. Now it's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker for today's event. Professor John A. Powell is one of the foremost public intellectuals in the areas of civil rights, civil liberties, race and ethnicity, housing, poverty, and democracy. He is currently a professor of law and a professor of African American and ethnic studies and the director of the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley. He has introduced into the public lexicon the concepts of othering and belonging. Professor Powell was born in Detroit in 1947, the fourth son of sharecroppers from the South. Determined to succeed despite the obstacles he faced, Powell graduated as valedictorian of his high school class and sought to attend one of America's top universities. Even so, he met resistance from teachers who did not want to write recommendation letters because of his skin color. Notwithstanding these challenges, Professor Powell earned a BA from Stanford University and a JD from the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. He was a public defender and spent much of his career in the Midwest, even the Big Ten, at the University of Minnesota and the Ohio State University. In a 2003 interview with PBS, Professor Powell said, quote, "We have to be willing to sit with discomfort, to call into being the world that we all want to live in." Here now to invite us into some discomfort in service of creating cultures of bridging and belonging is Professor John Powell. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Powell.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank all of you. It's really a delight to be here. The only thing that could be better from my perspective, if I was there with you in person. I feel like I actually have a very easy task because the mayor has actually set out many of the major things I wanted to talk about. Again, I want to acknowledge that we're meeting in the midst of a high holy day, Jewish high holy day, Yom Kippur, and I wish everyone has a meaningful fast, which is oftentimes part of Yom Kippur, um, othering and belonging. Those are kind of wonky concepts. So unless you're an academic or a social psychologist, you may not have heard those terms. And yet, when we think about them, it's like looking for a yellow Volkswagen. Once we start looking for it, we find it everywhere. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about othering and belonging. But first, again, I just want to say I appreciate being here, and I appreciate Lincoln and under the leadership of the mayor of leaning into this question of belonging. Lincoln, as you know, is, as they say, as we said, coming from Columbus, Ohio, uh, you're the heart of the heartland. You're the middle of the middle. You reflect this country in so many ways. The city itself, very evenly divided between Democrats and Republican. We're in the midst of a presidential election. We're in the midst of uprising around racial justice. We're not there together because we're in the midst of a pandemic. So we're dealing with all of these profound, hard issues that affect each and every one of us individually, and yet we can't solve them simply on an individual level. I appreciate the men's basketball team stepping forward. I agree with the coach that the role of sports is actually quite important. You have people's attention. People look up to sports figures and others. But also want to acknowledge all of you. I think in order for this to actually go forward, it takes literally a village. It takes the private sector. It takes the philanthropic sector. It takes the community. It takes government. It takes all of us coming together to try to create a space of belonging. Now, again, Lincoln is fairly unique in some other ways as well. It is one of the highest, if not the highest, locality in the United States in terms of resettling refugees. And that can actually be scary. Or people who are coming from far distant lands, sometimes they have different religions, different language. And yet, Lincoln has opened his arm, and I dare say it probably hasn't been perfect. But as the mayor said, part of learning and growing does sometimes require discomfort, does sometimes require some pain. But also, when we do it right, it produces not only change, but incredible joy and opportunity. It can create belonging. So I want to talk to you a little bit about a couple of concepts: othering and belonging, bridging and breaking. Uh, and, and I want to help you understand these concepts as you go on your journey. And I hope that I have an opportunity to join you on this journey. And on this journey, you're an early responder. There are not many cities that have actually stepped out into a deliberate effort of belonging. A lot of cities have actually dealt with equity and diversity and inclusion, but not belonging. And so I'm going to start by just distinguishing othering and belonging from diversity, equity, and inclusion. You could think of it as diversity, equity, and inclusion 2.0. So let's talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I dare say that probably some of the viewers for this program and listeners will not even be comfortable or know the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when we think of diversity, diversity is just a fact. We are diverse. We are becoming more diverse. We're a very diverse country, a very diverse world. And in the context of people moving, we're not moving as much as we used to, but flying all around the world, social media, something happens in a faraway place. And unlike when I was a kid and you would never hear of it, you now can hear of it instantly. When you think of George Floyd, again, people all over the world saw George Floyd being killed almost in real time. That's unprecedented. And that actually presents some opportunities and some challenges. How do we make sense of that? How do we understand it? How do we understand that in Egypt, in Africa, in Detroit, in Lincoln, in the suburbs, in rural America? And so one way we understand things are the stories we tell, and I'll come back to that. But what I'm suggesting is that we live in a world now where we are having shared experiences in diverse settings. The world is getting smaller, and so the need to sort of come together becomes greater. Now, the world is getting smaller. And what that also means is that it's getting scarier in some way, or maybe. Um, Change actually produces anxiety. And if change happens really fast, we need help in terms of processing that anxiety. And that's not just true of humans, that's true of other animals. Uh, we are constantly being called to sort of adjust, to adapt, to change. And we normally can do it if the change happens slowly. But when the change happens really rapidly, we experience stress, we experience anxiety. And what's happening in the world today, everything is sped up. And even if the change is good change, so technology, the environment, the economy, migration, everything's changing. It's not the world that many of us grew up in, and and the world that our children will live will be a different world still. And in that world, there's a question: do I belong? Do I belong in my neighborhood? Do I belong in my city? It's not the city I grew up in. Uh, and so, how we process this information happens largely as a result of leadership and our structure and cultures. We don't process it naturally. We need help. So the stories we tell, the structures we create, the culture we celebrate will have a huge impact on how we interpret these stories. And there are two major ways of doing that. One is the world is changing and it's scary. I want to get off this train and go back to the past. I want to stop this train. And I resent, if not hate, those people who are causing this change. Uh, and that's called breaking, where you actually see the change and you see people who you assume are causing the change to be the problem. And so you go back to your country, or you don't belong here, or this is my country. Um, you feel sometimes that not only they're a stranger, that you're a stranger. Holly Hartsfield just wrote a book called Stranger in Their Own Country. We just did a poll, and the vast majority of Americans, Black, white, Democrat, Republican, rural, urban, the vast majority of them said they don't feel like they belong, that they feel other, that they feel a stranger in their own country. And that's what's fueling a lot of the polarization that's happening in the country, this fear. But there's another way of responding to this change, and that is the change of there's something new. Yes, it's not, I don't mean just a new iPhone or a new iWatch. That we're evolving, we're changing, the world is changing. Uh, but there's also excitement. And it's beyond, like I said, a new tech toy, and it's beyond new food. We're coming in contact with each other, and we can learn from each other, and we can care about each other, and we can create something that wasn't there before. Uh, and to do that requires not breaking, which I just described, where you deny the other's humanity, where you deny that the others belong, where you insist that the other is a threat. Instead, where you sort of join with the other, where you learn from the other, where you listen to the other, where you break bread with the other. Um, and that's called bridging. Bridging requires a couple of things. Bridging requires a container where people can come together. And it also requires the ability to empathetically and compassionately listen and practice with each other. Now, some of you who study psychology might say that sounds very similar to Alpert's work in The Nature of Prejudice, which he wrote in 1954. And he talked about contact theory. And he basically said when people come in contact under the right conditions, they actually can understand each other. The prejudice actually and stereotype actually goes away. Unfortunately, those conditions oftentimes don't exist. And if they are to exist, we have to help them to be real. So why not just diversity, equity, inclusion? Well, again, diversity is just a fact. The world is diverse. Our communities are all becoming more diverse. And it's like, I may not like the fact that winter is coming, but it comes, so I better prepare. Diversity is here. How we deal with it is a different question. When we talk about equity, the practice of equity is oftentimes experienced in terms of disparity between groups. And when we focus on that disparity, we actually oftentimes create a space where people feel a competition over scarce resources. That may not be real, but that's what people feel. And when people are competing for scarce resources, especially when some of those people don't look like us or worship like us, we feel like we have to beat them. It becomes a recipe for breaking. So the way we practice equity actually invites people to break, because if you win, I lose. It becomes a zero-sum game. And so there's, again, a fear that these other people are going to take my job, they're going to take my place at the university, they're not going to represent me in the city hall. And we have what I call artificial and sometimes manufactured scarcity. That's not necessarily what equity means, but that's how it's practiced in many cases. And so you have a dominant group, and then you have everybody else, and there's a fight between those groups. And that's breaking, and breaking creates more polarization. So what's an alternative to that? An alternative is something we call targeted universalism, which is that we say we have universal goals. Everybody wants something. We agree that everybody wants their children to be healthy. Everybody wants their community to thrive. Everybody wants to have good health care. That's the goal. That's a universal goal. The goal is not tied to what we perceive the dominant group having. So it's not saying, I want what white people have, or I want what rich people have. It's saying the universal goal is something that we're all aspiring to. And when we identify that goal, we find out that even the dominant group, however we think of them, actually has not achieved that goal in most instances. So now, how do we achieve that goal? In order to achieve that goal, we have to have targeted strategies. And the targeted strategies are based on how we're situated, both in relationship to the goal, but also within structures, culture, and power. And so the strategies for the Black community oftentimes, and the strategy for the Latinx community, the strategies for immigrant communities, for Christian and Muslim communities will be different because they're situated differently. But if we're successful, we're trying to move everyone through those strategies. Now that feels very different than when we think about our sort of narrow concept of equalities, like treat everybody the same. That's not the goal. That's not the strategy for targeted universalism. So to treat someone in a wheelchair the same as you treat someone who is ambulatory as they approach an escalator doesn't make sense. The person in the wheelchair can't get on the escalator. The goal is the same. The goal is to get them to the next floor. But the strategy has to be different based on their difference, based on how they're situated. So that's targeted universalism. So that moves us a little bit beyond sort of equity in the narrow sense. What about inclusion? What's the problem with inclusion? And I should share with you, we recently changed our name. We were the House Institute for Diversity, for a Fair and Inclusive Society. And after sitting somewhat uncomfortable with that for a number of years, we decided there's something wrong with this. So the way we practice inclusion in many instances is a weak or strong form of assimilation, where we say, you can come to my school, but everything at the school is already set. The way I try to help people understand this is that I'm giving a party, and I hope all of you in Lincoln will be able to attend, but it's my party. So what does that mean? It means it's my music, it's my food, it's my friends, and it's at my house. And you can come, but you come as a guest. And don't start messing with the furniture. Don't start looking in the closet. And at the end of the day, go home, or at least leave my house. So that might be a nice thing. Certainly, you may maybe you enjoy my party. That's inclusion. It's where you're joining somebody else's thing, and you're joining as a guest. Belonging is beyond inclusion. Belonging is that we are giving a party. It's our party. What does that mean? It's not my guest. It's not your guest. It's our guest. It's our music. It's our food. We're doing it together. We're all contributing. So we actually are co-creating the very thing we're belonging to. And so when we think about United States, do we all contribute to making this our place? When you think about Lincoln, it's not just enough to welcome immigrants. It's actually to say, this is your community too. And let's sort of talk about what that looks like. Let's sort of talk about what we all, not just what you need, but what we all need. Um, and so that's belonging. And so that takes us beyond diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let me just come back to bridging, and I'll stop after another couple of minutes. I'm friends with a famous scholar named Bell Hooks, and she makes the observation that when you bridge, bridges are made to walk on. What does she mean by that? What she means is that the person who's actually bridging between two communities oftentimes will be attacked by both communities. It's like, why are you hanging out with those people? And so it's not always comfortable, and yet it's critically necessary. Uh, and so, from our wonderful talk, I believe your mayor is a bridger. And even though, Mayor, you were saying some really wonderful things, I would say, don't be surprised when you're attacked. Because there are some people who don't believe we should bridge with people who they think of as different. There's some people who espouse not only they were different, they espouse a kind of purity. And so in the context of race, we actually talk about contamination, that certain people are contaminating our community, contaminating our race. In the African American community, we grew up with the idea that one drop of Black blood will contaminate whiteness. And so what I want to suggest is not just about whiteness, although it is anytime you get into a concept of purity, you're actually creating a space of not only othering, but also breaking. And so those people will say, I don't want to be in relationship with the other. I want to get rid of the other. I want to jail the other. I want to send the other someplace away, far away. And we see that happening all over the country right now. Fortunately, I think they still represent a small number of people. But even there, we have to be willing to bridge with them. Even there, we have to be willing to count them in the circle of human concern. So bridging requires the ability to sit with and be with people who are quite different. Sometimes people misunderstand bridging and belonging. They think, well, if I listen to someone, it means I agree with them. No, that's not what it means. Nor does it mean necessarily that I'm sitting with someone or being with someone simply to change their mind. Bridging is about empathetically and compassionately engaging someone else. And it happens at the interpersonal level, but it also happens at the structural and institutional level. How do I create structures, communities, cultures that says this is your place, that you belong? And let me just say a little bit about belonging, then I'll stop. So belonging is a sense that you are welcome, but not as a guest, as a full member. And you get to explore together. Belonging calls forward the best in us, and also those parts of ourselves that are even hidden to ourselves. Belonging is a deep and profound expression of our shared humanity. And it also recognizes that our shared humanity is constantly shifting. Belonging is a journey. It's not an end post. We're always aspiring toward it. We're always remaking ourselves. There's an African saying, which is that I am because you are. We are profoundly, deeply connected. And I'll just end by saying we've done a lot of surveys, and I've had the pleasure of being the director of now the Othering and Belonging Institute. In our surveys, we find most Americans, while on one hand, deeply divided around issues, on the other hand, really are longing for connection, really are longing for bridging. Americans are not comfortable with this polarization. They want something else. They believe that we can do better than that, and we can, but it requires us listening to each other. It requires us building bridges. Now, some people, when they hear belonging, they think, well, I know what that means. It's the opposite of othering. And they infer that belongings means saming, which is another kind of assimilation. That I can care about you because you're just like me. I can understand you because you're just like me. That's not belonging. Belonging is not the same as saming. Belonging says, I can see you, I can listen to you, I can appreciate your humanity, I can care for you, even though you're different than me, and I can learn from you. So, othering was denying someone humanity. The solution to othering is not saming, but belonging. And it really requires a lot of work, requires bridging. And as the mayor said, it can be hard, but it also can be incredibly joyful. Uh, and I think you started on an incredible journey. I want to acknowledge Prita and the mayor and others for helping you initiate that journey. Uh, but not only do you need that in Lincoln, we need that in the United States and the world. So no pressure here, but you are really a leader in the world. And I'm pleased to have a chance to engage you around the question of othering and belonging.
I want to first thank Professor Powell for his groundbreaking work, for his inspiring vision, and for helping us both recognize the challenge and the joy that we confront as we do the work of belonging. And next, I'd like to introduce two local scholars who are here to reflect on his words. And I want to thank them for joining us today. They've generously agreed to provide some reflections on the challenges and opportunities for creating cultures of bridging and belonging here in Lincoln. We are joined by Professor Anna Shavers, who is both the former Dean and current Klein Williams Professor of Citizenship Law at the University of Nebraska College of Law. We're also joined by Dr. Jeanette Eileen Jones, who is currently an Associate Professor of History and Ethnic Studies at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. Now, Professor Shavers, over to you.
Sawubona, I would like to start off my comments by reflecting on that word and how that might help us to the journey that Professor Powell has talked about, othering and belonging as concepts that we can understand. Now, I learned those two concepts probably, like most of you, from John Powell and his work. And I also learned the term Sawubona from him. Since that time, I've done a lot of exploration of the term Sawubona. So I want to first thank the mayor's office, especially Alyssa Martin and my good friend Prita Bonzo, for giving me this opportunity to respond to some of his comments and help us begin a dialogue on what his comments mean, particularly to the Lincoln community. Now, you heard in his introduction that he has spent some time in the Midwest, and he made some comments, I think, referring to maybe Ohio State and the rivalry in football. But he does have Midwest connections. So I wanted to emphasize that because of the fact that sometimes when people come to us and share ideas from the coast, we may simply think, well, that's okay for them, but not so much from us. But he has lived in the Midwest, spent a lot of time in the Midwest, and has thought about many of these concepts that we've been introduced to. So, Sawubona, why have I decided to focus on that? I don't know if many of you have heard this word before, but it means by some people just simply, I see you. But more generally, from what I've learned in the African culture, it means we see you. And the focus is on your ancestors along with yourself and what people should see or try to explore our connectedness and our power to investigate our likeness and an invitation to participate in each other's lives. So what does that really mean? So if I say Sawubona to you, it does not necessarily mean that I know all about you or I know all about your ancestors, but it is an invitation. And in the African culture, you would respond with the phrase, we see you too, or Yobo Sawubona. So if you say that to me, that you see me, or I greet you saying, I see you, it's not actually factually true, but as I said, it's an invitation. So if you say that to me, you can't look at me and say, I see that you were born into the segregated South. I see that you drank from fountains that were labeled colored and white. I see that you went to segregated schools. I see that you were required to ride on the back of the bus. All experiences that I had growing up, but not experiences that you can usually tell. So Salabona, in some way, the way I view it, is a way to open a dialogue and open a conversation among all of us about our various experiences. It indicates that we are willing to be open and not be content to other those who are not like us because of our race, neighborhood, economic status, religion, sense of ability or disability, etc. There's a movie that was produced a few years ago called Crash. And Crash really focused on the Los Angeles area, but I think it had a much deeper meaning. What they were trying to show in that movie, that we often run around in our daily lives crashing into each other, literally in Los Angeles, since they have a lot more traffic than we do. But we rush around crashing into people, often with little effect. Physically, we may say sorry and go on our way. But especially in this time of internet communications, we have lots of crashes. We instantly receive a notification on our phones, computers, or tablets. Crash. We see a refugee child washes up on the shore in trying to get to freedom. Crash. We see a Black person is killed by a police officer. Crash. We see a child is killed in crossfire between rival gangs. Crash. We see that test scores are prohibiting some people in our society from advancing with their education. We see that they're often lower for Latino or Latinx and African American students. Can we say Salabana to these individuals without having discussions and an invitation to dialogue about their conditions, how they may be different from ours, but yet we can use those on this journey of belonging? So Professor Powell mentioned that we need to think beyond just the terms diversity and inclusion, even beyond equity. And I think in the past couple of decades, most of us thought, yes, now we accept diversity as a fact, and we know we have to deal with that fact. We then began to explore inclusion, looking at things that, for example, the Kirwan Institute has investigated quite a bit, the implicit bias. And so we've been going on our way thinking we understand diversity. We've been getting training in implicit bias, but we haven't so much thought about the equity. And I would use the other word, access. So as Professor Powell says, when you're, for example, going to have a party and you just invite people in, but you control everything about that party, people are not having the access to the structures that help create the environment of that party. And in a broader sense, not the structures of the environment that we live in. So I think that what we need to do is think about this concept of Salabana. It makes us question what we really know about others that we go about crashing into in our daily lives, or crashing into because we saw something on the internet or on the TV. And maybe the few of you that still read newspapers, you read it in the newspaper. But what can we do with those concepts? And how can we all come together to begin this journey of belonging? And so I think we can take a lot from the writings as well as the statements that John Powell has shared with us today to try and begin this journey of belonging. The University of Nebraska is also commencing a journey, and I would say that all of us can come together on this journey to try to understand the kind of dialogue the kind of access to each other we need in trying to achieve this belonging and moving from the concept of otherness. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shavers, for your leadership, your scholarship, and your thoughts today. We really appreciate you. And next, Dr. Jones, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, first I want to thank Mayor Baird and her office for inviting me to be part of this program. Thanks to Alyssa and Prita, and thank you, Professor Shavers, for agreeing to be on this panel with me. And lastly, I want to thank Professor Powell for the work that you have done throughout your career that still continues, and also for just being here today to talk with us about othering and belonging and bridging in our own community, but understanding that it moves beyond Lincoln, Nebraska, and as you said, it has global consequences. I'm just going to start by talking about something that came to my mind as I was preparing for this talk and thinking about specifically bridging, and then this idea of DEI, right? As you said, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I was thinking about Harry Belafonte talking about a conversation he had with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., or recalling a conversation where I believe it was 1968, and he seemed Dr. King seemed to be preoccupied, a little disturbed about things that were happening. And as they were engaged in a conversation, he reportedly said that, "I fear that I'm asking," and I'm paraphrasing, "my people to integrate into a burning house," right? And you know, Belafonte says, you know, I pressed him, I asked him, "Well, what do you want to do? What should we do?" And he said, basically, we need to be the firemen. We need to make sure that the house doesn't burn, right? And that really is something that stuck with me, because at times it seems as if inclusion, as you said, is about going into someone else's home or someone else's institution on their guidelines, right? And so we have no role in how those homes or those institutions, and I'm using that as a metaphor, are created, right? And so we're expected to, at some point, to leave something of ourselves at the door and to go in and to just accept that system as it is. And I think what King was trying to say is that we needed transformation, that it wasn't enough, like the moral vision of America was so corrupt that it wasn't enough just to say we want to be part of America. We needed to transform America. And then by not just America, but thinking about, you know, he had a global vision going outside of that. I know that Dr. Powell has in the past talked about James Baldwin's book, and I remember reading this, The Price of the Ticket, various essays about race in America. And again, you know, this is an important part of his ruminations. It's like, okay, what does it mean for me to be included into a space where I'm not valued, where who I am, in this case, a Black gay man, is not valued, right? Or whoever we are at this, you know, our intersectional identities, what part of our identities are we expected to leave at the door to become part of something? And I think that is what we need to reflect on as we live in this society, as Dr. Powell said, particularly in Lincoln, where we have indigenous people who have been here before any of us, and people who were forcibly removed here, right? As part of United States policies of removal and dispossession of land. You have other people who migrated here, settlers, but we also have refugees. And so how do we understand what this society looks like if we're talking about belonging? How do we bridge connections between all of these different experiences? As you said, the strategies have to be situational. None of we do not all have a kind of universal story of how we came to be in this place called Lincoln, Nebraska, but we need to figure out how we can bridge connections, right? How do we reach out to people and have dialogue that's constructive? As Professor Shaver said, our own university where we teach at, we're on our own journey of belonging, but we also need to ask, what is it about the institution? What is the very mechanisms of the institution that will make students feel that they don't belong? Mm-hmm. It's a land grant university, but that's about it. But like, what is the culture that will make certain students feel like they don't belong and others feel like they belong. So for me, I'm just really thinking about back to what King said to Belafonte, thinking about what Baldwin said, and there were other, you know, plenty of Black feminist thinkers who have been talking about this as well. What does it mean for us to belong in something that is not co-created by us or that we have no role in transforming? So I believe that's where I'm gonna end at, is that we need to make sure as we're on this journey that we're not just, as Shirley Chisholm said, bringing a seat to the table, but we're actually helping to set, Priya said this as well, set the table, right? That we're not just bringing a chair, but we're setting the table, that we're devising the course. What we're gonna eat, you know, like what are we gonna do? So thank you so much. And hopefully that can help us start some dialogue.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones and Professor Shavers and University of Nebraska at Lincoln for being on a journey with us in co-creating a community of belonging. And I think as we build resilience together, we will be a stronger community going forward. And on the topic of resilience, I wondered if Professor Powell would like to have any words on that topic about how this work, where it is challenging, where it can involve pain, where it also involves joy, can also help us build strength and resilience. And if you'd care to share a few comments on that before we proceed, we'd be grateful.
Thank you for the opportunity. So, and thank both of you for your comments. They were very helpful. So before I switch to resilience, I just want to point out that the reference to James Baldwin, because I think some people may not know the reference. And James Baldwin, as you know, many hopefully, that he was a great writer. He was a Black gay man, and he wanted to be part of this literary association. And eventually they acknowledged him. They said, okay, Mr. Baldwin, we recognize you can write, and we're asking you to join. But don't remind us that you're gay. It was the early version of Clinton's Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And don't show up with all your Black friends. And he not only didn't join, he actually then went to France. He was brokenhearted. He was saying, leave yourself at the door. Only bring in the most narrow aspect of yourself. And he wrote a book called The Price of the Ticket. He was saying the cost of joining was too high. And too often, that's the case. And I just want to give one other example of that, very concrete, which people understand when they hear it. In the 1970s, women were coming into the formal workplace in record numbers. And when they got to some of those workplaces, literally, there was pictures of pornographic pictures on the wall. So if you went to an auto shop in the 1960s and 1970s, you're likely to see these pictures on the wall. It's because, in part, there was all men, not that all men believe in this or ascribe to this. But when the women showed up, they were saying, take that down. And people were saying, well, this is the workplace. This is how we do it. You can join and you have to adapt. And went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court struck it down. But the point is, the women were being asked to join something, and almost every structure is actually carrying some norm. We don't notice that norm until someone who's outside of that norm joins the structure. And then they raise questions, and it may seem odd to those who've been part of the structures, like, you just got here and you're already causing trouble. And as we make new norms, as we make new structures, it's not making it for the group that's just recently arrived, it's making it for all of us, which actually means Blacks, whites, gays, straights, but also white men. So it really is all of us. And some of it's structural. And let's give one last example, then I'll get closer to the mayor's question. I'm tall, you can't see that right now, I'm sitting down. But when I look at houses, almost one of the first things I notice are how high the ceilings are. For tall people, low ceilings feels oppressive. And again, it's not anyone trying to oppress me with that, but I walk into a house like, oh, can hardly stand up. So structures matter. They carry messages. They're normalized against certain population. And I'll deviate just a little bit, because one of my favorite ones is overhead luggage racks on airplanes, right? I used to fly too much before the pandemic. Well, what group is that disadvantaging? What group is that ignoring? What group is that othering at a structural level? Well, think about it, overhead luggage racks. Who has a hard time negotiating overhead luggage racks? Well, people who are shorter. Well, is there any group that's shorter than other groups? Well, as a group, women are shorter than men. Doesn't mean they're not tall women. Doesn't mean they're not short men. But as a group, women are shorter than men. As a group, women have less upper body strength than men. As a group, and as a group, and this one is maybe very controversial, women carry more luggage than men. so, so who designed these luggage racks? And think about the work they're doing. And so once we women start flying, we may have to redesign the planes. Two other quick things. The concept of belonging is actually all over once you start looking for it. I mean, Maslow talked about the hierarchy of needs, and the third most important need on his hierarchy was belonging. His students have said he got it wrong. So he had, I think it was like food and security, then belonging. And his students said, no, that you don't get food or security unless you belong. That belonging actually is the first thing that we need in terms of our needs. We literally come into the world physically attached to somebody through the umbilical cord. We need to belong. That's how we get our food. The mayor asked about resiliency. So resiliency, I think, is misunderstood oftentimes because a lot of times they'll say that person was resilient. And I think of resiliency as a collective game, it's collective sports. And there's a lot of research on this, that the larger if you have a strong, healthy network, you have resiliency because your network can absorb some of the punches, some of the challenges, some of the stresses that you have. But your network can also work against you. We talk about flat networks. So if you think about Katrina, so when those levees broke, the entire community was under stress. And so if a kid was turning to their parents about being stressed out, the parent was saying, I'm stressed out too. And the parent turned to the minister or the priest and said, I'm hurting. And the priest and minister says, I'm hurting too. So unfortunately, sometimes we have communities where the entire community is stressed out. It's still important to be in community, but it's also really important to try to have the community have some place that actually can hold that stress. And that shows up right now. So for example, there's recent research showing that when there's a killing of an unarmed Black person in America, the entire Black community for 2-3 months goes through a kind of trauma. So the entire community is hurting, not just the person who was killed. And how do we help that community? And we see that now also in terms of COVID. Also, just want to acknowledge, that in rural America, we see rural America suffering, and especially among white veterans. They come back to this country, they don't have jobs, and sometimes they have problems from the war, and their resiliency is not obvious because they don't have a network that can help support them. And they're trying to form that now. So again, resiliency is not an individual sport. And because the United States tend to be so individualistic, we think of it as you be strong. And people oftentimes ask me, how do I do this work? Why don't I get depressed? Not that I don't get down sometimes, but I have this incredible family, just so much love. And literally I've been at death's door more than once. And I made a promise to my dad, a silent promise, after one of my brothers died, that I would try to outlive my father. My mother had already passed. And so sometimes when I've been in that sort of deep place at death's door, and I'm thinking, I'm tired, I'm in pain, okay, I'm out of here. Nope, can't leave yet. My dad, I had a promise to my dad. So resiliency in some way is how you are engaged in a collective community. And so we talk about self-care, but self-care is limited. Self-care only goes so far. We need to care for each other. That's resiliency.
That's a beautiful definition of resiliency, care each other. Thank you, Professor Powell. As a part of this event, we've been honored to have some of our local residents film short videos about how they bridge and belong and put those concepts into action right here in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Hello, my name is Tim Clare, and I'm a partner in the Lincoln law firm of Rembolt Ludke. I'm also immediate past chair of the University of Nebraska Board of Regents. To me, creating a culture of belonging means creating opportunities for everyone to thrive and finding ways to connect with people from all walks of life. I was struck recently when I listened to a prominent African American business leader named Robert Blackwell. His message was that when we think of success stories within the African American communities, stories from the fields of sports and entertainment are the ones that most oftentimes come to mind. We need to make sure that all people from all walks of life have the opportunity to succeed in all fields. There is much more that we can do to ensure that everyone, regardless of race, gender, or other background, has access to a full range of opportunities and success stories, whether that's in sports and entertainment, but also in the fields of STEM, art, business, public service, entrepreneurship, or whatever the case may be. We are stronger as a community when everyone has the opportunity to use their own individual talents to optimize and become the best version of themselves. A lot of that opportunity comes down to relationships, social connections, and access to professional networks. We thrive when we have both deep and broad connections. Again, each of us can do more to step out and broaden our relationships in this community's web of social and professional connections. I was recently offered the opportunity to join the board at the Malone Center. It has given me an opportunity to learn more and build deeper relationships within our African American community. My hope is that we all can find ways to broaden our set of relationships by seeking out those opportunities and seeking out those relationships that have different perspectives and experiences. In doing so, it's important for us to remember that every person has some sort of pain or suffering that they're carrying. A lot of times they're carrying it silently. And we're not always going to navigate the minefields of mutual hurt and pain perfectly. Good relationships require an element of grace and understanding. We can't create cultures of belonging without it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lisa Hale. In the past few months, my husband and I have had the privilege of participating in several community conversations centered around acceptance and belonging. I think it is important that we continue to expand these conversations around acceptance and belonging so that we can help Lincoln become a city that is vibrant and welcoming for everyone. I want to continue to help Lincoln on the journey towards a city of belonging. I hope you do too.
Hi, this is Lancaster County Commissioner Deb Shore, and I'm happy to share with you my Belong moment. About 10 years ago, I was invited for the first time to attend our community's naturalization ceremony. I remember looking at the faces of these new Americans and being impressed by the diversity of their nationalities. They were surrounded by their children and their parents, dressed in red, white, and blue and waving American flags. These people were celebrating with all their heart the opportunity to become a U.S. citizen, something that those of us who were born here sometimes forget. So when we're making decisions about the future of our community, I keep that image in mind to make sure that everyone, no matter if they were born here or if they're a new citizen, that they have the feeling that they belong in Lincoln.
I'm David Graf, CEO of Huddle. To me, belonging means knowing your company values your whole self. Belonging is what it feels like to know everything about you is an asset and bring something important to the table, and that you're part of creating that environment for others. As we all work through these challenging times, that has meant embracing vulnerability in my communications with our team, acknowledging that I don't always have all the answers in the face of the uncertainty that lies ahead, and trusting that leading with authenticity and empathy will only serve to make our organization stronger. Huddlies are based all around the world and bring a variety of cultures, backgrounds, and ideas with them to work every day. We rely on our core values of we listen, we're respectfully blunt, and we're a family to embrace this diversity and create a safe space to bring your full self. We're fostering a culture where people thrive not in spite of their differences, but because of them.
To me, belonging means you are part of something. That's why when we start our company, Innovative Exhaust Solutions, we decide to treat our employees with respect and to feel that they're part of our company. One of our traditions in the company is that every time there is a new employee, we tell them welcome to the family. We want them to feel appreciated, and we want them to feel that they are an asset to the company, not just one, but everybody as a circle.
Hi, I'm Preeta Bansal. Creating a culture of belonging to me means innovation and success as a city. My family's called Lincoln home for 50 years now, and I went through K through 12 through Lincoln Public Schools. The city has given so much to my family, and it's been home and welcomed us to contribute back our energies. After nearly 35 years being away from Lincoln, attending college and grad school and working in the private and public sectors in New York City, Washington, D.C., Cambridge, Mass., and London, I returned to Lincoln a few years ago because this is home to me. There is nothing like a Nebraska sunset, and there is nothing like a drive with rolling prairie along the way. I also came back because I want to encourage other bright kids of diverse backgrounds and who grew up here, not to go elsewhere, but to stick around and create belonging right here. Lincoln is a place that I think will lead the nation in the no-nonsense, practical way that is our hallmark. At a time of so many crises in this country, internal division, extreme weather, pandemic, not to mention the constant disruption of our ways of being and seeing from the advances of technology, our nation's innovative genius and healing will come from here, the heart of the country, just as the leader we are named after, President Lincoln, led our nation to unity amid deep and destructive partisan, regional, and racial division. Creating a city of belonging is not about focusing on the past, but it's about building a strong and resilient future. It's acknowledging that no one person and no one group has all the answers. It's only when we truly open our hearts and learn from each other that we can chart our way through uncertain times and continue to innovate, survive, and thrive. So it's maybe not surprising that in the wake of all these destructive fires affecting so many parts of our country, firefighters are learning from indigenous Native American fire prevention techniques. Or that recent studies show that in the wake of the mental health crisis during this pandemic, it's African American populations, despite that they bear such heavy and disproportionate burdens from COVID, that are faring better on the mental health front, having built up generations of strong internal resources and reserves to carry on in the face of difficult circumstances. So creating a culture of belonging is not a feel-good, mushy exercise or a soft thing to do. It's about building a strong, successful, innovative, and resilient city. It's about becoming the best we can be by drawing from all parts and not creating new divisions along any dimension in the name of healing. The truth is that each of us carries within us feelings of otherness and separation, regardless of our labels or external identities. Whether we're educated or uneducated, rich or poor, white, brown, or black, Christian or non-Christian, or from a difficult home environment. Regardless of the causes of feelings of otherness and separation, belonging is about embracing all. And I think Lincoln's going to lead the way to create structures and cultures that encourage us to look beyond surface divisions to uncover each other's stories and a sense of our shared humanity, shared grief, and shared love, as well as our shared connection to this beautiful land and the city we all call home.
Well, on behalf of our city and all our residents, thank you, Professor Powell, for being part of our Lincoln family. And thank you, Professor Shavers and Dr. Jones, Coach Hoiberg, Kobe, Tim, Lisa, Deb, David, and Juan, and all those who contributed to this event. Special thanks go to Preeta Bansal, who was instrumental in bringing John Powell to Lincoln and conceiving of this endeavor to amplify and celebrate Lincoln as a community of belonging. Our deep gratitude goes as well to the Malone Center, Nelnet Foundation, and Bansal Charitable Fund, who, along with the City of Lincoln, sponsored this event. And thank you to our promotional partners, Lincoln Public Schools, Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, Lincoln Community Foundation, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, our Community Health Endowment, our Faith Coalition of Lancaster County, Social Emergence, Awaken at Lincoln, Cause Collective, NAACP Lincoln Branch, Leadership Lincoln, Good Neighbor Community Center, Asian Cultural Center, El Centro de las Americas, the Women's Foundation of Lincoln and Lancaster County, and Centerpoint. Finally, thank you to all of you for tuning in to this special event. We hope everyone in Lincoln will accept this invitation to journey toward belonging. To join the journey, please register your interest through the displayed link, which can also be found by searching our city website, keyword belong. Once registered, you will be informed of opportunities in the coming months and year to connect with bridging and belonging efforts by various sectors in our community. As we take individual steps along this journey, we help shape a future for our city in which everyone enjoys a deep sense of belonging and connection with the place we call home. Let's make Lincoln a model for the rest of the country in how we turn toward one another. Thank you.